Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel, finding time from your celebration for the U.S. soccer team getting through on the World Cup. My name is Dmytro Pokhylko. I run the media and tech team at New York City Economic Development Corporation. As some of you may know, EDC has been at the forefront of many of the entrepreneurship and tech initiatives that ranged from building new applied science campuses to New York to help build our own engineering pipeline, to helping launch a number of incubators for startups, to improving broadband, to also rallying a number of communities behind various competitions that included Big Apps, New York Top Maker, and many others. As you can see from the panel name, we're going to talk about civic innovation. These days, the feeling is that everyone is talking about it. How it's great, how it's going to make the world better, how it's going to change things that we do. And a lot of it is true, but at the same time, I feel today that I would like to go slightly beyond the hype and to better understand what civic innovation means, first of all, and what how we can better use some of the strengths of civic innovation. I feel that there are learnings that each of you can bring that could help us get the most out of civic innovation, but then also avoid common mistakes that people make when they get involved with civic innovation. To help me do that, we have a panel of distinguished representatives. They come from various backgrounds, and we're fortunate to have them here and to hear and also learn from your unique perspectives from experience in getting involved with communities and with civic innovation. Let me quickly introduce you all. To my left, immediate left, we have Alex Tepper. Alex is the Managing Director at General Electric's venture groups, where he focused on growth, strategy, and investment in robotics and advanced manufacturing. Prior to that role, Alex was a global director of innovation for General Electric, where he works across all the GE and businesses to design and bring to market breakthrough products and new business models. He collaborates closely with Global Research Center and is helping lead the advanced manufacturing commercial strategy for GE. Alex is also a co-founder of GE's Open Innovation Center of Excellence. Next to Alex, we have Kara Chessel. She has led the research, service design, and project management efforts for the Office of Innovation at New York City's Department of Education since 2010. Kara's current role includes managing open data project and designing market-facing engagement that connect the private sector and the educational stakeholders. She's passionate about improving access to STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, especially for women and minorities, and she plays on the shuffleboard team in Brooklyn. Next, we have David Mafuda, who's the CEO of Bandwagon, and is a pioneer of network vehicle industry, and he has been a prominent speaker on this topic at schools and conferences across the country and the world. He's the member of the I-Beam Sustainability and Urban Research Committees. At Bandwagon, David has won over $1 million in funding from NYCEDC and Verizon Powerful Answers Award in sustainability. Prior to Bandwagon, David co-founded Very Polite Movers, successful Brooklyn-based furniture moving collective. He's also a co-founder of the Fixers Collective, which is a social movement in New York dedicated to care and restoration of broken things, speaking of engaging various communities. And last but not the least, we have Greg Kieser, who's a technology strategy consultant at Robinhood, and he oversees technology grants and projects with agencies that Robinhood already funds. This ranges from tried and true technologies, such as data analysis and business intelligence tool, to new innovative approaches, such as consumer-facing apps and MOOCs. For you, like obviously many of you know that Robinhood is New York's largest poverty-fighting organization, and since its founding in 1998, it has dispersed over $1.5 billion in grants and initiatives to hundreds of New York City-based organizations, programs, and initiatives. So as you can see, it's a very varied panel. Like I think every one of you brings its own unique perspective. So let's dive in. Before, I think just to set up the conversation, I'd like to better understand what you guys think about civic innovation, what it is for you personally and for your company. Does it have to engage communities in terms of that untapped brain power, or does it have to ultimately go back to the communities, or is it both, or is it something else? Alex, do you want to start?
Sure.
By the law of proximity?
In terms of perspectives, I'm guessing I'm the big company perspective coming from GE. For us, civic innovation is about creating an ecosystem and helping foster an ecosystem of innovation. And I don't think it's necessarily one particular segment that you need to focus on. It's entrepreneurial, it's engineering, it's the governmental side of things. And fostering innovation is not an easy task. And I think it takes an effort from big companies, small companies, and the government as well.
Greg, you worked with many of the stakeholders as part of Robinhood's initiatives. How do you guys define that?
So it's civic innovation's been part of our DNA since the very beginning. So we were founded in 1988, and you know, we see the relative size of our budget in terms of our grant-making budget. Say in last year was 182 million, compared to $70 million budget of the city. So we see an opportunity to influence those dollars, and we take advantage of that as much as we can. So we can take risks, and we can try business models that the city might not be able to, and then roll it off to them. One example of that is in the early 90s, when AIDS epidemic was ravaging New York, the needle exchange was a very controversial thing. We were able to fund that. We became the biggest funder of needle exchange, and we were able to collect data and demonstrate that it actually stopped the flow of HIV. And then soon after that, the city took over. And so that's kind of been the tenor of a lot of our investments throughout the years with the
Interesting. City. To follow up on that briefly, so you talked about that problem. Do you feel that it was Robinhood that identified the problem and a unique opportunity for you guys to get involved? Like, how did that pan out that actually was a successful story?
Well, we're highly dependent on our partners on the ground, so we're not actually the front-facing organization, so we have partners that address the issues in the community, and they essentially, it's a combination of two. We use research to back up all of our investments, but at the end of the day, it's the folks on the ground who really do the work and who give us the best understanding of how we can solve the issues.
Kara, from the DOE, the Department of Education, my understanding is that we also have to rely on, from the EDC's perspective as well, we have to rely on people on the ground and on the communities. Has your experience been similar, that you guys have to rely on communities on the ground and get the learning?
Yeah, absolutely. And to give some context, New York City's Department of Education is the largest in the country by almost double. We serve 1.1 million students in 1,700 different schools with an operating budget over $26 billion. So it's not unlike GE in some ways, but it's also not unlike Robinhood in some ways as well, in that we do want to engage our stakeholders and end users as directly leading that innovation. And we are sort of also part of an ecosystem. So we see the private sector, we see our role, and then we see the role of the actual end users is really contributing to and really starting innovation. And then we just sort of shepherd it along the way. And for us, innovation isn't necessarily a thing. It's not an iPad. It's not a new product. For us, it's really about a process. And the process for us always starts with that definition of the problem by the user. So we call it user-centered design, or we call it, all sorts of different things. But for us, our work, specifically at the Office of Innovation, starts with that problem definition from end users.
To go on, in terms of your experience with civic innovation, we just talked about that. We need to be reliant on communities. We need to know. I guess we need to admit that a lot of our companies are not necessarily best at spotting trends early on and being able to get involved. Like, I think, there's a lot of collaboration that needs to be happening with stakeholders on the ground. At which point do you feel you guys need to get involved? Like, how early on you need to get involved? How much time do you need to give to some of these trends to pan out? To see who's an important player in this or that issue. I just wanted to hear from your experience.
Yeah, so I have an answer to that question as an entrepreneur, but it sort of backs into my understanding of what civic engagement and civic innovation is. So start off with civility or cities. Cities are basically exist so that we can unlock the power of collaboration, the ability for people to work together and produce value. And so traditionally, the role of the regulator, or lawmakers, or government is to set rules for that interaction so that people can do that most effectively. But what we're seeing with software is that software can also do that and can do that in certain ways faster than regulators and legislatures can. And it's interesting that software is written and like laws are written, but they're both infrastructure. And so from an entrepreneur's perspective, one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur is because it seemed like the most effective way of lawmaking, the most effective way of setting the rules of the game. And changing the rules of the game to provide, basically to create kinds of interactions and kinds of collaboration and kinds of services that I was not seeing in the world. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, we think we're at the leading edge. The reason we're entrepreneurs, the reason I'm an entrepreneur, is because I think that that's the fastest and most effective way of changing the rules of the game to provide communities with better access to resources and better opportunities to work together productively.
And then, I guess by extension, it's all the rage. You saw Uber at the entrance. Airbnb is propping up for the next step in their existence. The whole shared economy conversation. How do you guys view that? Is that civic innovation per se, or do you see this as just an innovative way to find a niche and to really address a pain point that will ultimately benefit a corporation, not necessarily will have impact on communities?
Well, I can answer, but I want to go back to what you said a moment ago, which I thought was really interesting. Part of the reason why I joined GE, going back about 2 years, I had offers from 2 startups and 1 from GE. And I realized my next job, I want to be the one that had the biggest net positive effect on society. And ironically, I ended up joining GE. And the reason I joined is because the amount of the effect that you can have by doing a few good things at GE affects billions and billions of people. So what's really interesting to me at GE, especially now that I'm in the ventures group, is partnering with startups like you and helping scale those very, very broadly. Not just from a funding perspective and infusion of capital, but the idea we have billions and billions of customers, whether it's in the energy portfolio or healthcare or aviation or appliances. What's really exciting about it, about affecting change for me, is the ability to scale things very, very broadly with GE.
And so specifically, what stage of idea or company do you see as appropriate for GE's opportunity for scale at that?
For us, we're involved very, very early on, even before a company is formed, to look at trends that are converging, right? Whether it's technology or macroeconomic or demographic or whatever, figuring out where different industries and sectors are going. From an investment perspective, we do seed investing, we do all different series all the way through. And all the way to, massive, I'm not involved in them, but massive, multi-billion-dollar acquisitions as well. What's really exciting about it for us in the Ventures Group is the early access to technology and trends and the people that are going to really drive the change. And what we can do is we can help foster that change by scaling it massively.
I'm also curious what you guys think about scale and sort of what your respective organizations are with respect to scaling new ideas.
Yeah, so a good example of something we're doing now that we hope will really scale is, and this is kind of in partnership with the government, but there was a federal judge in Brooklyn who saw that a lot of immigrants were having lots of legal problems and they were not getting resolved, and therefore they just kind of got deported or they got pushed aside and so forth, or got put in jail, et cetera. And so we started what's called the IJC, it's Immigrant Justice Corps, and we're essentially taking individuals from straight out of college and also straight out of law school and turning them into fellows to help these immigrants. So it's sort of we hope it'll be sort of a Teach for America, but for immigrant justice situations. And that idea came from the federal judge, Judge Katzman in Brooklyn. So it's one of those things where it comes from government, we hope to test it out, and we hope it will scale nationally at the end of the day.
Yeah, look, I think that's, Kara, do you want to say? It's an interesting, I think, idea that oftentimes this idea or innovation or a trend spotted or opportunity spotted can come from many places. It can be someone who's dealing with this day in and day out, or someone like you guys. But then I think for some of the stakeholders who are here, General Electric or Department of Education or others, I think the job is to really sometimes direct it or to provide some structure or provide the platform that would bring the best out of it. Has that been your experience so far? And do you feel that large organizations are better set up to do this job well? Or do you feel that it's not necessarily necessary in terms of the availability of a lot of online platforms these days that allows people to collaborate? Anyone wants to take it?
Yeah, I think for us, we think about the ecosystem, as you mentioned. So we're one player within a broader ecosystem that includes both startups and nonprofits. And when it works best is when we're able to broker access between all of those people, find what works best, and then we have the networks then to scale. However, we can't do that without the other people providing support roles in not only the ideation process, but also in the prototyping and creation process.
I see.
I would just add that one of the things that we're focused on now is the fact that a lot of low-income people, so essentially the people that are served by the programs that we fund, now are just starting to get internet access in their hands. So I'd say the past couple of years, that's both anecdotally, and there have been some Pew research that shows this. And so, we're investing in and we're thinking of ways that we can find solutions to help people better connect with social services in the same way that people currently connect with Yelp for restaurants and stores and so forth. And so these are things that we'll definitely be investing in the near term, and hopefully will scale in a big way.
Interesting. It's also, I'd like to cover the aspect of civic innovation on this, on the bottom line perspective a little bit. Robinhood, mission-driven, kind of the focus area is defined, similar to Department of Education. EDC is also, so there's a problem, we need to be involved, and we will support with resources and in-kind contributions as well. Alex, you mentioned that you provide scale to different kinds of projects that could be innovative or could be disruptive. To what extent does doing well by doing good has to be like a zero-sum game? Is it possible to have both? And at the end of the day, what's more important? And do they have to be competing?
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. I mean, I'll give a really good example of something that we actually launched recently in partnership with the New York City EDC. And it's something called First Build. And what it is it's a new approach for us to develop with a co-creation external community new major appliances. And so we created an open platform. And incidentally, the key for all this in my mind is an open ecosystem and not just an ecosystem. We have our own ability to develop things within GE, where we realize that it's even more powerful if we work with the outside world to do that. So from a civic innovation perspective, for us, partnering with the EDC is great because it energizes designers, engineers, startups here in New York City to contribute ideas. What we also have done is we paired that co-creation with micro-manufacturing to create smaller batches of things. Another example, not in New York City, is the second half of that, which is in Louisville in Kentucky. And what we did is we're creating a reconfigurable microfactory there in partnership with the University of Louisville. And the idea is to create small batches of products with engineers from the University of Louisville coming in. It's going to be an open space for anyone to come and use the machines to develop whatever they want, kind of a hacker space. In the end, we paired that co-creation with the world for developing these solutions, including the partnership around micro kitchen development with the New York City EDC community, paired that with some civic innovation on the Louisville front. So in the end, I think for us, it's about activating those ecosystems. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. The focus can be, we can, as a company, introduce great new appliances, but for us, it's allowing the outside community to develop those products with us and then get them out to millions of people to solve their issues.
Yeah, I have a similar project example. So in New York City, you have to pick which high school you go to. So imagine being 13 again, and there's 700 options, and it comes to you in a phone book. So we took that phone book and we created an open data API, and then we found a group of companies that had analogous products, so college finding apps, big data engines, and so we asked them in 8 weeks to convert their products to use our API and to create products that supported the high school choice process. there's 75,000 students who go through the high school choice process every single year. So it's a huge number of students. So the companies that we paid them a small stipend, but they were more interested in brand recognition and user acquisition. So they have other products.
Okay.
And then we actually worked with a $17 million venture-backed company out in California called Find the Best. So they find the best car, find the best CPA, find the best college, and now there's Find the Best New York City High School. But when they went through the process with us, they said they were better able to develop their other products as well because they learned a lot of insights from working with our students.
David, thanks, Kara. David, when you were launching your company, what was your thinking process? Were you thinking about how investable this is, how scalable and attractive it would be to investors, and if yes, or one of them is yes, it's worth proceeding, or do you have to be really passionate about the implication to the community, and then along the way you'll find a way to capitalize and be successful?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question and the previous question. So I think I'm thinking more about rules for some reason. It really kind of just depends on sort of how you build your business. So I think it's definitely possible to both do good and do well or make a lot of money, however you want to define that. And for us, it's really straightforward. The more shared rides we generate, the more money we make. Our business doesn't have to be set up that way, but it is. So we're extremely aligned, and these are the metrics that we're tracking are completely aligned in terms of carbon savings, gasoline avoidance of gasoline consumption, with additional revenue creation. Personally, we initially started the company as a not-for-profit, so we were definitely mission-driven. But that was a mistake. I think we're in the for-profit sector because we think we can do more good as a venture-backed company, as a for-profit company. I don't think that's always a mistake, but for us, the amount of excitement, particularly around transportation now, but even a number of years ago, and basically the amount of resources that we identified that could be put behind our core idea just seemed too good to pass up, and so that's kind of why we decided that it did make sense to be a for-profit company.
Interesting. And I think the debate is still out there, whether civic innovation has to be solely supported by sponsorship and be set up as a nonprofit model. I think there have been a number of examples of how a company would benefit from a proper process set up and proper metrics and really be result oriented. Just to expand on David's point, sort of learning, there's a lot of hype about civic innovation and how great it is, and obviously there's been a lot of examples of how communities can really rally behind an idea or an issue or a mission and create a lot of great things. At the same time, and everyone seems to be pursuing that approach. Everyone wants to tap into that community, into that mode of operating. What are some of the sort of cautionary tales or advice that you guys have about civic innovation? When does it necessarily doesn't work? What is it not good for in terms of what kind of issues it's not really set up to help with? Do you have any feedback on that? Yes, that's encouraging. Yeah. Yes.
So my first answer was large physical infrastructure projects, but we're seeing that large big solar projects are now fundable through community through collective action. So cross that one off. I don't know.
Right. It's unstoppable.
I feel from personal experience when we first launched Big Apps. Go ahead.
So we mentioned this earlier to a certain extent, but low-income groups are still drastically underserved by new technologies, and that's I think that's a function of just the for-profit industry going where the money is. So it's much easier to launch a new application in an audience that has a lot of money and has a lot of excess to spend, as opposed to building something for a community that can't necessarily pay up for a product. So I think really income inequality is basically a huge area that's underserved by at least for-profit innovation or technology innovation.
I also think that I should say, I would imagine that projects are more successful when it's partnerships between those different types of entities. So nonprofit and private and startups and government. So I think that the more of those constituents that can be going after the same problem, the more likely it is that you'll actually solve them versus going at it alone.
Does anyone know of repositories of those kinds of projects, or can highlight other examples of successful collaborations like that? I mean, I think that's really, really valuable to be able to identify those successes.
Yeah, the New York City Department of IT, Do It, is their acronym. They actually have a Tumblr that has a really interesting look at people who've used the Open Data Portal to sort of create civic projects in partnership with them or with the sort of the data owners. So those are some really interesting things to take a look at.
Tony Hsieh in Las Vegas is doing a good job with that too. He's for those of you who don't know, he's the CEO of Zappos, and he started off as a startup, right, with a little bit of bootstrapping and venture fund, and now he's a very big company. So now he falls sort of in the big company category, but he has a big venture fund. He relocated his entire company from the outskirts of Vegas into downtown Vegas. It's called the Downtown Project. They're doing some really, really good things there. And it's a combination of solving infrastructure needs, funding of startups, solving healthcare needs, all the right elements. And we'll see how it's maybe, I don't know, 2-3 years in, something like that. So we'll see how it plays out, but it seems to have a lot of the right elements aligned. It's called the Downtown Project, and it's based out of Vegas. And Tony Hsieh is the CEO of Zappos, and he's the guy who's doing a lot of the funding, but he also has the power to bring together a lot of partners.
And obviously the Big Apps sort of story, right? So Big Apps this year is bringing together, a dozen different city agencies, people from the private sector and startups to sort of have that community, have the open data resources, and then provide the space for those people to collaborate. So New York City has been doing it since 2009. So I think we're definitely one of the first communities to do it. I think other communities that I would look to are Code for America fellows sort of starting projects that are now turning into ventures, as well as projects that are happening around Google Fiber cities. So that connectivity provides a lot of opportunities provided by the private sector, but then also in partnership with government.
I think to Alex's point, when we first started with Big Apps, I think we were just a city agency that had a lot of data on its hand, and we engaged with the developer community directly. Didn't really provide a lot of structure or direction, just pretty much just treated that as an academic project, do something with the data. And then the learning has been such that we would want to bring stakeholders in the room, corporates, nonprofits that would really help us shape the mission, to really provide direction, and then also support system in terms of mentorship and some of these private sector elements that would then not only help the mission, but then also help with sustainability of these companies. So I think having you guys in the mix is definitely helpful. Greg, I wanted to touch upon what David earlier said, that there's a company that first is being set up as a nonprofit, but then has implications to be successful commercial entity. In terms of commercializing civic innovation, how do you balance, given what Robinhood's mission is, how do you justify? What is your process when you pick projects that you guys support?
I don't think we absolutely have nothing against that, and obviously sustainability. If something can scale and to be sustainable and it needs to become for profit, I think we would support that. That said, I don't think there are a lot that we do now, and the return on investment that our donors look at is the return on investment of the dollars we spend on the lives of the people who are served by the programs that are funded. So we have metrics to do that. We have an economist on staff, and we measure the impact based on research of a given investment. So if it's a job training program, we'll measure whether or not that job training program had a positive impact on the people who graduated and kept their job for 1 year. And so that's kind of how we define return on investment. But in terms of commercializing things, we definitely don't have anything against it, but it's not somewhere we've invested heavily yet.
Okay. So, I guess I'd like to wind down a little bit in terms of what does it mean for the government. Obviously, I'm representing New York City Economic Development Corporation. As we continue getting engaged with the community, as we continue trying to make New York a better place to live, work, learn, and play. Any final words of wisdom in terms of what we should keep our eyes out for? What some of the areas that we should focus on, and what some of the things that the government uniquely has in order to sustain and drive civic innovation.
I mean, for me, because I work at GE, we get approached for money all the time. Mm-hmm. And I jokingly say at the most half joking, anytime anyone comes with a proposal to GE, they always add a zero onto the end. And I think that there are different partnership models out there than us just simply paying for something and sponsoring it. Mm-hmm. We have literally 50,000 engineers and technologists that are interested in helping the world out. They do this sort of in their day jobs at GE, but they're really, in the end, they're working on a niche part of some bigger product. But personally, in their own time, they're working on new water filters for the developing world. They do these things on their own. So the new models coming out there that we should tap into versus the typical going to big companies to sponsor large events.
Right.
And I think it's an under-tapped approach.
Mm-hmm. So approach being tapping new communities, not just hitting you guys up.
The approach being there are a lot of good things that big companies bring to the table. One, mm-hmm. we have lots of people. Two, we have lots of scale. Three, we typically have big PR engines.
Yeah.
And civic innovation is something we're inherently very interested in, and it's also good for us as a brand. So I think tapping into a bigger company is something that hasn't been done as much as it should be for civic innovation, other than tapping into us for money.
I see.
Which I think is kind of a boring way to do it.
Right, yeah. Kara?
Yeah, I think for us as well, thinking about how do you create the right incentives, and then how do you also sustain these engagements. So we're thinking a lot about what are the right types of engagements that are not, the one-off hackathon, but the sort of in the line of what the EDC does with big apps, opportunities that provide mentorship, opportunities that provide open data, opportunities that provide potentially partnerships with larger organizations that allow some of these smaller ideas to really sort of take root.
Mm-hmm. David, what about you?
First thing that comes to mind is open standards. To the extent that the playing field can be level, I think that only serves to encourage innovation, encourage people to experiment if the playing field isn't shifting. And then just in terms of, I'm thinking about talent acquisition and bringing people to New York to work on some of this stuff. Affordable housing, it's kind of a big ask, but it costs a lot of money to pay people to work here. And a lot of that is just around real estate prices, how expensive it is to live here.
Right. Okay.
I would say generally, I'm not going to say anything that they didn't cover, but tends to be money and talent. And obviously a lot of big companies have a lot of great talent. They also have a lot of money. So that can be very helpful to us. And on the side of government, it's helpful to get access to kind of the people that are being served by government, because they're the same people that our programs are serving as well. So if we can bring together all those things and come up with scalable solutions, and we see that as a win.
Great. I think we have a few minutes for questions. If people have questions in the audience. Yes, please.
Congratulations to you on that whole big apps thing. I'm really thinking, I really like the concept behind it. It really is about lifestyle. It really is about community, and you guys are thinking, and it's refreshing.
Thanks.
But here's my question to you. As far as the voting process is concerned, is it just a selective panel that's going to make the final decision on the apps that won, or is the residential community enabled to voice their opinion and vote for those apps that they feel are more applicable to the New York City lifestyle?
Right. It's both, and it's done in levels. So the first cut is being made by a group of evaluators that are coming from various institutions, from academia to nonprofit to more traditional ones. At the same time, there's also a popular vote where there's a tool on the online platform for big apps that people can vote for their favorite app or product. So we are engaging community at large that would put a voice that it's not necessarily super specific, but they would, it would be like a popular award kind of thing. So there's definitely an opportunity for that.
And that's with just the 20 finalists, or is that for all?
It's for all people, and then among those 20 finalists, then you have a group of sort of like a more selective panel that would look, both at mission, at sustainability, at a number of other judging factors that would be, taken into account as they decide on the final winners. Right. Any other questions?
Alex, this goes back to something that you said, but it's exciting when a big billionaire or a previous entrepreneur like a Tony Hsieh in Las Vegas or a Dan Gilbert in Detroit can come in and totally remake the landscape of the city. But I mean, do you see any obstacles in having that one sole CEO, one sole dictator, quote unquote benevolent dictator, be responsible for transforming a city? I mean, those cities are interesting where those local governments have failed their citizens, constituents, but cities like New York, Seattle, Boston, where government's thought of as a positive force, I see more value, at least in my perspective, of the city being the one that drives that innovation and drives that change. Wanted to see it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, ideally, it's more of a groundswell activity that creates that environment of innovation. And I think for a good example that I was going to say earlier in New York City, and it's for-profit, is General Assembly. That's training people to become entrepreneurs, both in coding and other elements of becoming an entrepreneur. And yes, it's a for-profit company, but in the end, they churn out people in classes of future entrepreneurs, which then come back and teach classes. So ideally, it's an ecosystem that's born out of the people and potentially the government as well. There's a lot of controversy around the downtown project and Tony Hsieh specifically, because from a real estate perspective, the real estate, once it's turned around, you buy it very cheap. Once it's turned around, the people in the downtown project who bought real estate down there are going to make a tremendous amount of money. So there are a lot of conversations around, is it really about creating, bringing that community up, or is it really about profiteering? I don't know enough to say one way or the other, but I think you're right that if ideally it comes from the bottom up.
Do we have another question in the audience? Nope. Okay. This is it. Thank you all for coming again, and thank you all of our panelists. This has been very productive and informative.